right of reply. So when we talk about right and reply, folks, we're talking about what you can do if you aren't happy. Okay, so you've gone through the process. You now can write this kind of firm but polite letter. Okay, and it's one of those things where actually I think there's no reason in kind of being angry or being kind of upset or being really disgruntled with a contracting authority. Write a nice polite letter that's firm and says, actually, I think you might have made a mistake here. I think you haven't scored us properly. I think you've done this wrong. I think you've said in the evaluation criteria you're going to do this, and then you've actually measured us on different things. Those kind of points there, kind of are the kind of things you can write back to them. Now, that is not a formal legal challenge. Okay, that's just a letter. Okay, so you might want to take legal advice on that before you send it, but actually you can send that and maybe say, we are encouraging you to either review the process, review the tender, go back through it again, maybe rescore it, or actually you need to tell us that you're not going to do that, because actually if you do, what we're going to do is we're going to raise a formal legal challenge. Okay, now formal legal challenges, you apply to the court, and the court sends a nice attractive pink piece of paper with lots of big heavy legal lines on there, things like kind of cease and desist and big scary words like injunction, and these things will be stamped by the court, so it'll have the court seal on the corner of it. And the reason that you don't just do these willy-nilly is because these cost you a minimum of £10,000 just to raise that, plus your own legal fees of your lawyers to actually organise that for you. Okay, so this is an expensive thing to do. So you never do this on a low value contract, but you would always write that letter if you weren't happy to say, well, actually, I don't think you've done this fairly. I don't think you've been transparent. I'd like to reconsider, that kind of language. You can always use the Freedom of Information Act, so FOIA. You can do an FOI request. I'm not a big fan of these from the other side of the fence. I don't think it's the best way of doing this, but actually it's something that you can do if you want to. So Freedom of Information Act kind of gives you that ability to write to the contracting authority and ask them to kind of tell you why they've done what they've done. When I'm on the other side of the fence as a public sector procurement professional, I would always prefer that somebody actually just email me, ask me the question, and I'll probably tell them anyway. They should only use a Freedom of Information request if, the contracting authority maybe is being less helpful than they could be. But again, it's a method that's open there. It's in the legislation, so you can use it if you need to. Once the contract is actually live and running, you have the ability to call on something called contractual ineffectiveness. So contractual ineffectiveness is effectively, is the procurement authority, the contracting authority, doing what they said they were going to do when they tendered. So, you tended to buy a fleet of 10 cars, you actually ended up buying a fleet of 10 hovercrafts. Well, I don't think that's the same thing. The numbers are the same, and you might use them for transport of people, but that's very, very different technologies. So actually, I'm going to say, well, I'm going to raise a contractual ineffectiveness concern via the court. And actually then we're going to look at maybe stopping that contract, re-rolling it, and then going out again for competition. There's lots of rules around kind of contractual ineffectiveness, and again, far too complex to go into today. But if a contract's just started running, you're out of that 10-day period, but you're still not happy, it's something that you could consider looking at. And again, you can take your own legal advice on what that might mean. Now, there's something else that exists at the moment, which is called kind of the PPRS, Public Procurement Review Service. Okay, and what this is basically a kind of like a body that exists, and it's a bit like a kind of a complaints body. It doesn't have a lot of teeth, but you can raise suspected poor practice with them, and they will look into it on your behalf and then let you know the outcome and write back to the government department and maybe change policy or whatever it may be. So these kind of things exist. Like I said, it doesn't have a lot of teeth at the moment, and I'm not aware personally of any really, really good kind of work that's come out of this in any of the procurements that I've been involved with. That's not to say they don't do anything, but that's to say my own experiences, I haven't seen a lot of action from this area. Now, with the legislation change, I would reckon this is something that is going to change. One of the things that they've been looking at as part of the consultation on the legislation is whether kind of organizations are going to have to are going to be able to kind of apply to somebody like an ombudsman, whether the court process is going to be scrapped and replaced by something else, whether it's all going to be kind of these people, the PPRS people, are going to be given teeth so they can actually do something about it. And I don't know what that's going to look like. So for the minute, be aware of what you can do with that right of reply, but then also expect that these things are probably going to change in the new version of the regulations, be that maybe around April, May next year, or maybe even a little bit later, depending on what happens with COVID and the kind of winter period.